He signed a contract to marry a woman he barely knew, but every single night he drove to the same little flower shop just to see her. Not to impress her, not to win her, just to feel like himself again. My name is Callum Voss, and this is the story I never thought I'd tell anyone. I grew up inside walls that were built from money and expectation. The Voss family had been in the pharmaceutical industry for over 100 years. My grandfather had started it with a single factory and a relentless belief that medicine could save lives and build empires. By the time it reached my father, Edgar Voss, it had become one of the most powerful names in the country. And by the time it reached me, it had become a cage. I don't say that to sound ungrateful. I say it because it's true. Every decision I ever made was filtered through one question. What does this mean for the company? Which university I attended, which friends I kept, which rooms I was allowed to feel sad in. I learned very early that being a Voss meant performing strength, even when you were completely hollow inside. And I was good at it. Boardrooms didn't intimidate me. Negotiations didn't rattle me. I could sit across from men twice my age and dismantle their arguments without raising my voice. People called me sharp, disciplined, visionary. Nobody called me happy, because nobody ever asked. The one strange, quiet thing about me that no one could explain, not my father, not my colleagues, not even my closest friends, was my obsession with orchids. I had an entire greenhouse on my estate dedicated to them. Rare species from across the world. I knew their Latin names, their growing conditions, their temperaments. Some people found it eccentric. I found it necessary. There was something about a flower that refused to bloom unless the conditions were exactly right that I completely understood. I was 34 years old the winter my father called me into his study and told me he was dying. He didn't say it dramatically. Edgar Voss didn't do dramatic. He said it the way he said everything, directly, with his hands folded on the desk and his eyes steady. Stage 3, the doctors give me 8 to 14 months. And then, almost without pausing, he told me what he wanted in return for his peace of mind. On paper, it was the kind of merger that business school professors would write case studies about. My father believed it would secure everything he'd spent his life building. He believed it would protect thousands of jobs, ongoing drug trials, entire research divisions that were closer to breakthroughs than the public knew. And he was dying. So I said yes. Diana Holt was exactly what you'd expect from a family like hers. She was striking, intelligent, and surgically composed. When we met for the first formal dinner to discuss terms, she shook my hand like a business partner and smiled like someone who had already calculated every possible outcome of the conversation. I respected her. I genuinely did. But there was nothing between us that felt like warmth. It felt like two chess players agreeing to share the board. We were polite, we were appropriate, and we were completely wrong for each other in every way that mattered. 3 months before the engagement was set to be announced, something happened that I didn't plan for and couldn't have predicted if I'd tried. My driver took a different route home one evening because of a road closure in the city center. We ended up winding through the Old Quarter, a part of the city I hadn't been to in years. Narrow streets, old stone buildings, small shops with hand-painted signs. And then, through the car window, I saw it. A small flower shop. The sign above the door read Lena's Blooms in faded gold lettering. The lights inside were warm against the gray evening sky. And standing in the window, arranging a cascade of sunflowers with paint-stained hands and her hair falling loose from whatever she tried to pin it with, was a woman who looked like she hadn't noticed the rest of the world existed. I don't know why I told my driver to stop. I still don't know. I just knew that I needed to be closer to whatever that was. I walked in. A small bell rang above the door. She didn't look up immediately. She just said, "I'll be with you in a second. Don't touch the peonies on the left. They're still setting." I almost laughed. Nobody talked to me like that. Nobody. When she finally looked up, there was no flicker of recognition, no widened eyes, no shifting posture. She just looked at me the way you'd look at any ordinary customer who'd wandered in off the street and said, "Looking for something specific or just browsing?" I told her I was looking for an orchid. Her face changed, not with excitement, but with something more genuine than that. Genuine interest. She walked me to a small display in the corner and started talking about each one with the kind of quiet authority that only comes from actually loving something. She told me which ones were stubborn, which ones were forgiving, which ones would outlast everything if you just left them alone. I bought one, a pale violet phalaenopsis, and I told her my name was Cal. She said, "Nice to meet you, Cal. Come back if it dies. I'll tell you what you did wrong." I came back the following week. The orchid was fine. I came back anyway. And then again the week after that, and the week after that. Her name was Lena Cross. She was 29. She'd studied botanical illustration at a small art college and had spent 3 years painting for a nature publishing house before her mother got sick and everything changed. She'd come back home to run the shop her mother had built from nothing, take care of her younger brother Otto, and somehow keep all 3 of them from falling apart. She did all of this with a steadiness that I found completely extraordinary. She painted flowers between customers. She knew the name of every regular who came in. She argued passionately about whether dahlias were underrated. They were, she insisted. And she made the worst tea I had ever tasted in my life, which she offered me every single visit with complete confidence that it was excellent. I never told her it was terrible. I drank every cup. In that shop, I wasn't a boss. I wasn't an heir or a CEO or a man with a dying father and a contractual fiancé. I was just Cal. She wasn't accusing me. She was just talking. The way she always talked, honest and unguarded, like the words arrived before she could arrange them. But I heard it like a verdict. I opened my mouth, and I said nothing, because the truth was too large and too late, and I was afraid that saying it would end the only real thing I had. I should have told her that night. That was my mistake, and it cost me everything. 3 weeks later, my father decided to move the announcement forward. The engagement was declared publicly. Press release, photographs, the full production. Within hours, my face was on every news channel and every morning paper. Callum Voss, heir to the Voss Pharmaceutical Group, to wed Diana Holt in landmark merger of 2 dynasty families. Lena's brother Otto saw it first. He showed her the photograph on his phone. The same photograph that was running on the front page of the business section. The same face she had been making terrible tea for every week for 3 months. She told me later that she stood there for a long time without moving, and then she set down the orchid she was holding, and it fell to the floor and she didn't pick it up. I arrived at the shop the following afternoon and the sign said closed. I knocked anyway. She opened the door, but she was different. Not cold exactly, just sealed, like a room where all the windows had been shut. "You should have told me who you were," she said. "Lena, congratulations on your engagement, Mr. Voss." And she closed the door. I stood on that pavement for a long time. I want to tell you I had some great, dignified response. I didn't. I just stood there with my hands still raised and the cold coming through my jacket, and the understanding settling into me like something permanent, that I had just lost the most important thing I'd ever found. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that something was already moving in the background that would change everything again. Diana was sharp, I've told you that, and she hadn't missed my distraction, my distance, the way I showed up to our planning meetings looking like a man sleepwalking through his own life. She hired someone to look into it. Not out of jealousy, she told me later, but out of pure strategic instinct. She needed to know what she was walking into. Her investigator traced my visits to the old quarter, to the flower shop, to Lena. Diana didn't send a lawyer. She didn't call me. She went herself, alone, on a Tuesday morning when the shop was quiet. She sat down across from Lena, ordered nothing, and placed a check on the table. It was large enough to cover Lena's mother's surgery, the shop's rent arrears, and Otto's remaining university expenses, with room to spare. The condition was simple. Disappear from his life. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Lena looked at the check for a long time. Then she slid it back across the table without a word. Diana raised an eyebrow. "I'm not in his life," Lena said quietly. "He's the one who came to mine." Something shifted in Diana's expression then. She was quiet for a moment. Genuinely quiet, not composed quiet. And then she said something that surprised even her, I think. "I know," she said. "That's what worries me." She left the check on the table when she walked out. Lena left it there too. Around the same time, I was having the most honest conversation I'd ever had with my father. I told Edgar that the marriage was wrong, that I couldn't do it, that I had found something real and I had been too afraid to protect it, and I wasn't willing to keep choosing fear. I expected anger. I got something worse. He told me the truth about the company's finances. The debt wasn't a small problem. The company had been bleeding quietly for years through a series of failed acquisitions and regulatory penalties that the board had managed to conceal from public view. The merger with the Holtz wasn't a legacy move. It was a lifeline. Without it, we were looking at collapse. And with that collapse, thousands of jobs, ongoing clinical trials for treatments that patients were actively waiting for, entire research programs that had taken decades to build. I sat there, and I felt the walls of that cage close around me one final time. And then, 3 weeks later, Otto called me. He called me before he told Lena. He just asked me one question. Why? And I told him the truth. Because I had found out about their situation through the most ordinary conversation. Lena had mentioned once, without self-pity, that her brother had almost had to defer his studies because the funding fell through. I had made one call the following day and put the process in motion and never said a word about it. Because it wasn't something I wanted her to thank me for. It was just something that needed to be done. Otto was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "She needs to know." But before anything else could happen, the night before the formal engagement signing, Diana called me. She asked me to meet her. Not at a restaurant, not somewhere public. At a small park near her apartment, on a bench in the dark, like two people who needed to tell the truth somewhere that wasn't watching them. She told me she had been in love with someone for 4 years, a man named Raphael, who had worked as her family's estate manager before her father dismissed him for not being the right kind of person. She had agreed to this arrangement partly to keep the peace and partly to buy Raphael time to build something on his own, without her family's interference. She had been protecting him, the same way I had been protecting a company that was protecting thousands of people neither of us would ever meet. "I don't want you, Callum," she said. And somehow, she made it sound like the kindest thing anyone had ever said to me. "And you don't want me. We've both been pretending." We sat there on that bench for a long time without speaking. And then, almost at the same moment, we both exhaled. And there was something in that exhale that felt like two people putting down something enormously heavy that they'd been carrying for a very long time. I think I almost laughed. He told me he had known about the flower shop for months. His own investigator had told him. He had watched and said nothing because, and this was the part that undid me completely, Lena reminded him of my mother, a woman named Clara, who he had loved before duty and dynasty had intervened. A woman he had let go for exactly the same reasons he had tried to bind me to Diana. He had carried that choice like a stone in his chest for 40 years. He had watched my mother build a quiet, beautiful life without him, and had never once stopped wondering. His final line was this: "I carried my mistake for 40 years, son. Don't carry mine too." I read that letter 3 times, and then I put on a plain jacket and walked out of my estate and into the city. No driver, no security, no title. I walked to the old quarter, down the narrow streets, past the hand-painted signs. The light was on inside Lena's blooms. I could see her through the window, painting at her work table, unhurried, focused, a small lamp throwing gold across everything around her. I walked in. The bell rang above the door. She looked up, and she didn't look away. I put 2 things on her counter: the check that Diana had left, torn into pieces, and beside it,